Lord, if you had been there. How haunting these words must have been. Mary, tears streaming down her face, nose dripping, evidence of just how raw her grief is, falls at Jesus' feet and blames him for the death of her brother. Lord, if you had been here. This is the second time these words hit Jesus. Earlier in the chapter, Martha, Mary's sister, first abashed Jesus with the same accusation. Where Mary wails, Martha proclaims, "But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask them." Lord, if you had been here. In 1944, an 18-year-old was drafted into the Air Force. He brought with him a collection of poems as well as the comforting nihilistic works of Friedrich Nietzsche. Jürgen Moltmann served for less than a year as a German soldier before surrendering himself to a British officer in the dark of night. For 3 years, young Jürgen was shuttled to one prisoner of war camp to the next. He found himself surrounded by theology students at his final transfer. He read his first theology book there, Reinhold Niebuhr's The Nature and Destiny of Man. In those dark years of his life, this man was brought face to face with a Christ who knew all too well what it meant to suffer. Lord, if you had been here. Did y'all catch Jesus' response whenever Mary flings herself at him? Jesus Christ, a co-creator of the universe, has a visceral gut reaction. In Greco-Roman culture, the gut was understood to be the home base for emotions. So when the text says that Jesus was disturbed and greatly moved, we should think about the physical feeling we get when our stomach drop and our insides squirm. Jesus waited 2 days to travel after hearing that Lazarus was dying. And now he faces the consequences of his actions. Perhaps he expected everyone to have steadfast faith in him like Martha. Maybe he didn't think Lazarus was all that bad off. Maybe he thought this was a great way to show off his vast cosmic powers. Regardless of his intention, Mary confronts Jesus with a devastation that even he cannot stomach. And so he does the only logical thing to do. He weeps. Lord, if you had been here, then my brother would not have died. Call me a downer, but I find grief to be humanity's greatest equalizer. You can try to run from it, bury it deep within, or act as if it doesn't exist, but all of us have to face grief, pain, and suffering at some point in our lives. To be human is to feel. To be alive is to know death. Jürgen Moltmann experienced this when he returned to Hamburg at the age of 22. After 4 years of war and POW camps, he was finally home. Hamburg was the major port city in northern Germany and had been laid to waste by Allied bombs. His spiritual wandering led him to a place where Jürgen confessed, "I didn't find Christ, Christ found me." As he walked his ravaged city, Jürgen heard the wailing of German mourners as they dug through the rubble. Moltmann's own suffering recognized their agony as the people cried out, "Why did God let this happen?" Mary's accusation plunges itself into that 20th century war-torn city. Yet for Moltmann, the question, "Why did God let this happen?" seemed wrong, a little off. It seemed like the Holy One was hidden away somewhere else, playing the universe like one plays 3D chess. This wasn't the divine that Jürgen knew. He looked at the people. He looked and beheld at a gut level the suffering within each person, and he saw God. Mary, Martha, and Moltmann each experienced a grief too deep for words. All witnessed a needless death. All found themselves face to face with Jesus. Too often we celebrate the resurrection of Lazarus without acknowledging the grief and suffering around him. We do the same for Easter, rushing to the tomb to forego the deep darkness of Good Friday and the bated breath of Holy Saturday. But I find the miracle is weak without the knowledge that Jesus wept. Jesus, too, experienced a grief too deep for words. Jesus also witnessed needless death. And Jesus found himself face to face with others who also bore the image of God. What does it do to our faith when we choose to sit in the uncomfortable space of grief and pain? When was the last time we set down the cliché sentiments, the false smiles, and allowed our souls to grieve? It was this honest, gut-wrenching experience that brought Jürgen Moltmann to a place of faith. Despite his years of pain and fear, or maybe because of them, Moltmann went on to become a leading theological voice. After receiving his doctorate, he pastored a church for 5 years. He started his teaching career in 1958 and never looked back. His book, Jesus Christ for Today's World, was placed in my hands during my final spring semester of college. Within it, I read Moltmann's story of seeing God and the people living in his ruined city. He went on to say that the question, why did God let this happen, implies that God was not right there in the middle of it. Moltmann saw God all around him, and the people digging through the rubble, and the old man tying a child's shoe, and the face of a woman who laughed while crying. Everywhere he looked, he saw God. So maybe God isn't in the business of letting things happen or making things happen. Maybe God isn't somewhere else playing the universe like one plays 3D chess. What if God is with us? What if God grieves and suffers alongside us? What if God moves and breathes with us as we serve our hurting world? What if God has been here all along? Beloved UBC, this is the Christian message. It is a message so raw and human that our God took on flesh to live, serve, cry, and die, and through death leave behind a legacy and a call to love. While Martha and Mary both got to stand in front of Jesus, Moltmann teaches us to keep our eyes open to the ways in which God walks among us right now. Our church and world are still unpacking the baggage of COVID pandemic. Children under 11 are just now getting a green light on vaccines. We have questions regarding what is going to be our new normal. We worry about the climate and how it will affect our children. Racial violence continues to tear families apart. The list can go on and on and on. Yet with all these questions and doubts, we know one critical thing. We have each other. Throughout our gospel, we bore witness to the community showing up to each other. Martha and Mary felt the sting of grief because of their great love for Lazarus. They were surrounded by Jewish friends, family, and professional wailers because the community knows not to leave someone alone in their pain. The good news of this gospel is that God never leaves us. God is never absent. Even in the worst case scenario, God enters the mix through our bodies, our voices, and our presence. Just as Moltmann saw God and the people stumbling around Hamburg, so too are we called to find the Imago Dei in each other and the strangers that pass in and out of our lives. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, another German theologian who captured the heart of community well, wrote in his book, Life Together, that God has prepared one great song of praise throughout eternity, and those who enter the community of God join in this song. He goes on to say, "It is the song that the morning stars sang together, and the sons of God shouted for joy at the creation of the world. It is the victory song of the children of Israel after passing through the Red Sea, the Magnificat of Mary after the Annunciation, the song of Paul and Silas in the night of prison. It is the song of the heavenly fellowship." Beloveds, as we gather together, virtually and soon in person, may we remember that our community thrives when we are united in love and service. May we remember that God is always with us. May we be comforted by Jesus' tears and challenged to bravely embrace our own grief. May these things bring us closer together as we sing the heavenly song of fellowship. For we know this to be true, that God has started a good work in us, and God will carry us through. Amen.